Hi everybody, this is Ann. Today I'm going to be demonstrating how to make a plaster slab. Plaster slabs can be a huge help to potters in the studio when they are recycling clay and for use in a damp box. I'm going to show you how to do this for under $25. Let's get started. Safety first. To avoid any health hazards, work in a well-ventilated area and wear a proper dust mask. Supplies needed for this project are a 5-gallon bucket designated for the mixing of the plaster only, plaster of Paris. We used 3 4-pound boxes, which were enough to fill this 40-quart storage container an inch deep. I want to make sure the plaster will not stick to the container, so I wipe on a thin layer of Vaseline to use as a release agent. To mix the plaster, first check the guidance on your box as to the water to plaster ratio. I started out by pouring a portion of the water into the 5-gallon bucket first. I then slowly added the plaster to the water so that I see it sink to the bottom of the bucket. Do not stir at this point. Keep adding plaster to the water. As the plaster gets wet and sinks to the bucket, the water will begin to get saturated until the plaster will stop absorbing into the water, eventually creating little islands floating on the top. This is where you add more water. Continue this process until all the plaster has been added. You may need to add a little more water to make sure all the plaster gets absorbed. Then stir it until it is smooth. The plaster will take on a sort of heavy pancake batter consistency. Quickly pour this into the storage container and smooth it out to fill the entire mold. The plaster will smooth itself out, but if it's on the stiff side, you may need to tap the sides to give it a little more help. As you tap the sides, you'll notice air bubbles will begin to make their way to the top. Keep tapping on the sides of the mold to get those bubbles to pop as much as you can. The bubbles will not diminish the effect of the plaster. Some people spray a little rubbing or denatured alcohol into the plaster when they're mixing it to break down the surface tension and alleviate the bubbles. The plaster immediately began to set up and harden, but I did not try and remove the slab from the mold for about a week to make sure the slab was strong enough to not break when I took it out of the mold. Even when I did take it out, I was careful to lay it on a piece of foam just in case the plaster was still a bit soft. But as you can hear when I tap it, the plaster has a very solid sound to it and seems to be very strong. The next step is to clean up the slab. It's very important to make sure you don't leave any little plaster bits on the surface of the slab. If you contaminate your clay with plaster, you can end up with problems like lime popping when you try and fire it. Now it's ready to use to reclaim wet clay. The way I do it is I take the wet clay out of the reclaim bucket and mix it into a nice slip. I strain out the excess water from the clay by pouring it into a pillowcase and letting it drain. Then it's ready to flatten out on the plaster slab to aid in the drying process. Be sure to check the clay each day to make sure it does not over-dry. Also, when you remove the clay from the slab, be sure not to use a metal scraper. You'll take a chance of scraping bits of plaster with your clay and thus contaminating it. Now I'll show you how to use the plaster slab to create a damp box. A damp box is a storage container or even cabinet with the capability to seal, closing thus the trapped moisture inside of it. The plaster absorbs and releases moisture into the humid atmosphere of the box. First, I thoroughly cleaned out the Vaseline and the little plaster bits that still may be inside the storage container that we used. Next, I placed the plaster slab under the water, not only to clean off any little contaminating bits of plaster from it, but also to put a little water into the slab. Then I put the slab into the container. Now you can insert any clay that you want into it to keep moist or rehydrate. Then firmly attach the lid. The damp box will allow the potter to work on a piece for days, months, or even longer without drying out. Thank you for watching. If you like our videos, please like, share, and subscribe. I'll see you next time in the studio.